Grit Crusaders. I am Brooke Plack, and I am your host here today on the Grit Crusade podcast. So welcome here today with me. I'm so excited that you've chosen to spend the next little bit diving into part 2 of our mini-series on defense mechanisms. And today's episode is sponsored by the Space Co-working and Event Venue in downtown Benton as well. And so one of the things that we're trying to do during this episode and during this mini-series is to be diagnostic of ourselves rather than pointing the finger at other people. Ugh, I know that's so hard. So when we start talking about things that have to do with psychology and thinking and all of those things, it's very easy to start saying, oh, I see that in my partner, my spouse, my coworker. But we're really trying to turn inward and focus on our own personal growth and development as well. So for today's episode, so part 1, I mentioned this is part 2. So part 1, we covered displacement and intellectualization. So we'll be sure and drop the link to part 1 into the show notes for you if you haven't had a chance to check out that episode. And we're looking at not only how these are negative impacts, but defense mechanisms can also be positive, right? So they're not always negative. It's positive and negative impacts. So we're looking at both sides of that. And for today's episode, we're going to be exploring avoidance and denial. And I'm specifically going to talk about how these affect our personal growth, our leadership journeys, and our overall productivity. So kind of wherever you find yourself in life, these things tend to show up. But before we get started, I do want to ask you, as a new content creator, it's really important that you guys give us feedback and also help us in building our online audience. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Or if you're listening on your favorite podcast streaming platform, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast so that way you're not missing any of the episodes. And I always say our podcast, not always mine, because it is a team effort with our production team, as well as my amazing executive assistant, Dia Bates, who is helping us on the back end behind the cameras, that you will get to see soon in an upcoming mini-series with her as a co-host. So that's exciting. So first of all, avoidance. We're talking about avoidance and denial today. So according to choosingtherapy.com, this is the avoidance definition. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice me looking down at my notes. I am not a psychologist. So I am a regular person talking about how this shows up in my life, in my journey. So I do like to make sure that I'm giving accurate information as well. So I like to check these notes and make sure, I'm using credible sources to help bring this information to light in our lives. So avoidance is defined as the refusal to think about or deal with people, places, or situations that cause anxiety or guilt. Ugh. And they're often used by those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, to avoid the place where trauma occurred. And it's not always necessarily the physical place. It could be the mental place where that trauma occurred. And so as a PTSD survivor myself, people throw that term around like all the time, like, oh, that gave me PTSD. But it's like not really something to throw around. It's something that is very traumatic to the person experiencing it, no matter how our perception of the situation is. So when we're using avoidance, and we don't walk through situations, that does manifest. And unresolved trauma, grief, experiences that we have, much like in episode 36, where my friend Evan Willens talked about that, is we have to deal with these things, and they affect our journey in so many ways when we don't. So take, for instance, here's an example of how we can apply this to our lives. I want you to think for a minute about your current to-do list and all the things that you have on it. So we always have this mental or maybe physical, it could be in a planner, it could be in an app, of things that you have to do. Now think about the hardest thing that's on that list. For me, it's getting Q3 financials wrapped up for our companies because it takes so much brain space. It takes limited distractions, and I need about a 6 to 8 hour window to complete it, which is really hard to find in my schedule. It's something that I have to be very intentional about it. But just like you, I have a whole lot of other things on my to-do list. Like I need to get my son's cardboard fiddle made for his nursery rhyme project that's coming up for elementary school. And I need to get, the extra pile of papers cleaned off my desk in my office that you can't see on the other side of the camera, right? And for you, you have tons of things on your to-do list. Maybe you need to stop and get groceries. Maybe you need to go check on a parent that you're helping care for. And so we have all of these things in our to-do list. And we also want to check emails and social media. And those things can be good, but they also can be time wasters. And then we tend to avoid the things that are harder, that require more of our attention, that require more focused effort in favor of doing things that are either easier for us to get done or they're quicker to check off the list. Because there's like this almost, gratification and got it done. And then things that are hard to walk through, things that take more time, whether it's hard mentally, emotionally, or maybe just physically harder to do, we tend to come up with reasons why we can't do those things. And so, for example, you might have a tough conversation that needs to be had with a coworker or a spouse or partner, but instead you book a girls' night out or a guy's weekend to a game because it's a lot easier and more fun. But the problem is down the road, we can't avoid it forever. And it eventually causes anxiety and stress in ways that start to manifest themselves unhealthily. That could be through addiction. That could be through binging, whether it's food or media. It could be through pornography. It could be through gaming. All different ways that we look to find outlets instead of going through the mess. And so before we jump into the second half of our episode, I do want to take a minute and share a recent experience that I had with our sponsor today, The Space Co-working and event venue located in downtown Benton. So last night, I actually attended a political fundraiser at The Space, and it was so great to be able to pop into a convenient location in Central Arkansas and just show up. It's beautifully curated and enjoy time with friends and other business colleagues to celebrate the journey that one of our mutual friends is going on. And so The Space makes it so easy because you can just book your time online, check out the website. They've got a calendar on there. You book the time online, and then like for your reunion or a party or a shower, and then you get an email from the team that tells you exactly how to get in, how to access the space, what time you can be there, how to get cleaned up. And then you just show up, and it's very private, it's very professional, and you get to host it just like it's your own space. So be sure and take some time and check them out online at www.coworkthespace.com. And before we jump back into the thick of defense mechanisms, I do want to do my favorite segment here on the podcast, which is Trivia in the Trenches. And today's is kind of funny. Okay, you ready for it? And if you're new and this is your first episode, so Trivia in the Trenches, if I have a guest, I'll ask the guest. But if it's just me and you, like today, then I just ask you. But I try not to give you enough time to Google it. Okay, I did not know this answer. So if you don't know it, it's okay. All right, here we go. What breed of dog is Scooby-Doo? A Great Dane! I didn't know that. Like, I was like, German Shepherd? I mean, he doesn't even look like a German Shepherd. I don't know why my brain thought that. But here's some fun facts about Great Danes. They are celebrities, record breakers, gentle giants, and, I bet you didn't know this one Great Dane even served in the Navy. His name was Just Nuisance, and he served on the HMS Afrikander, a shore establishment in Simonstown, Africa, between 1939 and 1944. And there's actually a book about him called Just Nuisance that provides insight into his story and how he's the only dog to ever be enlisted in the Royal Navy. Very interesting, huh? I know. Never know. All right, back to the second half of our show today. So for the first half of the show, we explored avoidance and defense mechanisms. Not always a bad thing. They help protect us through times of trauma and stress in our lives, but being able to identify them and make sure they're not showing up in ways that are harming our journey and our growth is key. And so the second one that we're going to talk about is denial. And I think this is something that like we have said about other people so many times. And so I cautioned you in episode 1, or let me say that again, not episode 1, part 1 of this mini series, that we don't want you to try to like point out who's doing this in our life. We're turning inward to look at how this is showing up in our lives. But it's really hard with this one because I feel like I've caught myself saying the phrase over and over again, well, he's just in denial. And I'm sure you have too. So we're going to try not to point the finger, but I do know it's hard on this one. So denial is defined as the refusal to accept the reality that something painful has happened or is still happening. The person in denial will act as if the distressing event simply doesn't exist. They may refuse to talk about the problem or acknowledge any feelings related to the problem. It's fine. It's fine. I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. When we know it's not fine. And sometimes we have to tell ourselves that to get through a situation, but many times we don't end up dealing with it after the fact, and it causes more problems later. Okay. So let me show you how this has shown up in my leadership journey. And this is a very personal experience that, I feel like you'll be able to feel and understand. So in 10 years in entrepreneurship and owning small businesses, there's been, staff members come and go, leaders come and go. And I was in denial. So this was probably in the first 5 or 6 years of my leadership journey. So I was a school teacher before that. I'd never been on a team leading adults. And so I had a lot to learn. And for me, I had a staff member that was making a negative impact on our entire team. Our entire culture, stress level of others, the way they spoke to the person, other people. And I kept working with them. I kept coaching them. I kept doing all the things that you want to do to help grow somebody. And I was in denial about the true effects that their behavior was having on the whole team. And the fact that these were choices that they were making that I couldn't fix. Right? And I realized once I had more tools, because that's all we're really doing here, right? On this podcast, even sharing stories so that you can develop tools and grow your own toolbox and analyze the way you're living your life and getting real in those trenches, whatever that looks like for you. But when I realized that these were the choices they were making, it made me turn inward and realize that I should have faced up to that sooner. But I thought I could make it work, right? But I didn't need to make it work. I needed them to go to a different pasture because this pasture didn't need that anymore. And so I've been able to take that into future situations and fire a lot faster, change paths a lot faster. And so it not only affects me, but it's that ripple effect of how it affects our team. And so sometimes that may be a breakup in your life. Maybe a friendship that you don't need to continue anymore because that negativity is constantly breeding over to you. Okay. And hello, in my divorces, the fact that I had to realize that I was the one that needed the fixing all along. So I was a fixer. I was an eternal fixer for people who didn't need to be fixed because it ain't my job to fix people. But what I really needed to be doing was turning inward and looking at how I could become better, how I could become stronger, how I could become more authentic. And once I did that, it changed my entire path, my entire journey, and led me to my husband now. So it's being able to identify these things happening in our lives, seeing how they're affecting us and making a difference. But so many times we don't take the time to do the very work to turn inwards, to look inwards and see how these can be showing up, in our lives rather than pointing the finger to other people. So I'm going to leave you with one question to consider today. What are you refusing to face in your life because it's simply easier to focus on something else or look the other way? And what's at stake if you don't address this? Until next time.
You've been listening to the Grit Crusade podcast with Brooke Plack. Our theme song is Thunder City by Lunar Ray, licensed through Soundstripe. This podcast was produced by Luminate Media Group. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.